Something really great about being the person invited to bring the sermon to a church that knows the Bible already, because y'all did half my job. And if I hadn't spent like 7,000 hours studying this, I'd probably be pretty mad because I did it already and really shortly and well. So I'm gonna take it another level, okay? That's what I'm hoping it's gonna work out okay. So I was planning on talking a little bit about Father's Day and Juneteenth. Father's Day. Do you guys know how that came about? Well, it came about as a reaction of Mother's Day. Do you know how Mother's Day came about? Yeah, Civil War. Mothers from Confederate and Union soldiers in West Virginia came together to say how stupid war is. But then that was like one iteration. Another one was a lady near Philadelphia got with Wanamaker's, the department store, and said, hey, let's do Mother's Day and make it, commercial. Okay, so that program went around for a while, and then it got adopted in American culture. And this other woman says, you know what? I don't have any mothers because they died. My dad is a Civil War veteran. He was widowed twice. He raised us children. I think he needs to be honored and seen. And that's how Father's Day came about. Jeff talked about Juneteenth. Please raise your hands. I don't want to go and repeat Juneteenth. Do you guys know what Juneteenth is? Okay. Just know it's the real emancipation of African Americans after the Civil War, because it took a while for them to learn that they were no longer slaves. Like a year or so, right? A year and a half, two? Imagine that. You're free and you're still told you had to be a slave. So I don't think it's any exaggeration, and it's nothing we don't already know, that our culture is built on human enslavement. It's built on colonialism, which is the idea that some people are better than others and we're going to make sure those others are just like us. None of this is news, right? Yeah. Makes me think about scapegoating and how America scapegoats. It's not uncommon for us to scapegoat both the truth tellers and the ones that are acting crazy, right? The ones that don't quite fit in. And I think about America's work right now of trying to do inclusion and trying to do diversity and trying to invite folks who we've oppressed and suppressed to the table, okay? And so I'm going to tell the story of two women. The first woman, Stefan, if you can put this up. This is Bozoma St. John. Have any of you ever heard of Bozoma St. John? Well, she's worked for some companies called Uber. Did you ever hear of Uber? How about Papa John's? She was called in when those two companies had PR problems, and she was called in to fix it. See, before that, she worked for Pepsi Cola. She's a marketing person. And they wanted to market their brand to be more diverse, and she was the one that got Beyonce to play the Super Bowl. Okay, so she's a really big deal. Not only that, she was working for this company called Beats when Apple bought them. So she was then working for Apple as a marketing person, and she was the first black female to do the keynote address on the Apple stage of Steve Jobs' stage. She's some pretty big person. Her parents came from Ghana. Her dad is a Reverend Dr. Arthur. And so she was born in Connecticut. She's been in Washington, D.C., following around his career. But at age 12, she landed in Colorado Springs. So I think she did her schooling there and then went on to college. And as all immigrant children, she was told she would be an engineer, a doctor, or maybe an engineer or a doctor. So she went all the way and got her pre-med and did her MCATs and got into med school, but said, parents, I just need 1 year, 1 year to kind of figure out what I want to do. And from that, she got connected into these amazing companies. The last company she worked for is a company called Netflix. You guys hear about that? So I listened to her talk to Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach. Do you guys know who they are? Glennon Doyle does momistry, and she has a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. And Abby is a world-class Olympian soccer player who literally set the record for all soccer players of this world in goals. So they're married, and they have a podcast, and they had Bozema on the podcast. Now, they had been friends earlier because they got connected into some kind of programs that they would take kind of as speaking engagements along the way. And they were talking about how they met each other. So Bozema goes by the name Bose, and people know her as Bad A Bose, Bat Bose, okay? She even teaches a course in Harvard called Bose. Anyhow, so she's pretty amazing, okay? And she sat at some pretty incredible tables, C-suite tables. Do you know what that is? Those are the highest executives in corporate America. She would talk about that she'd be the only person there that looked like her. Have you guys ever been in a space where you're the only person that looked like you? Yeah. Now, she's pretty confident. She's pretty incredible. And, but she was still navigating a space that people like her hadn't really navigated before. So she noticed that at first you kind of hung back trying to figure out what they wanted from her. And like, we welcome you, we welcome your perspective, we like the things that you've done, we want you to come into our culture and make it better. And she's like, they wanted to change, but change is really hard. And so things would happen in these rooms, and those of us who've been people that have been in these rooms kind of know it. You might say something and it doesn't get heard until the third person says exactly what you said, and it's now their idea. Yeah. And just lots of things that, well, I'll use her words. Glennon once said to her, as she was talking about how hard it is to show up in a space and be you in a culture that wants you but doesn't really want you to change anything. She says, I feel like I'm screaming into the wind. Can you picture that? Screaming into the wind. No one hears my voice. And Glennon says, so how can I help your voice be heard? And Bo says, no one has ever asked me that. And what happens when we get asked questions like that, where it asks us to take responsibility for what it is we actually want, she had to think about it. She went with one of her friends who also finds herself to be in rooms that she's the only person that looks like her. And within 12 minutes, they came up with an idea that called Share the Mic. Now, this happened in 2020. Did I ever say 2020? Okay. What happened is these wonderful, amazing, genius people are often heard in their culture, but white people usually don't hear about them. So she's like, how can my voice be heard? And they came up with a plan. What if we asked white women who have a lot of influencers on Instagram if they would turn over their page to amazing black women? And they did it in June 2020. Hashtag share the mic. So, I don't know if the women have a million followers, but they got on pages with people with 2 million, like Gwyneth Paltrow, or Katie Couric, or Julia Roberts, people that have 8 million followers, and said, go ahead, it's your voice. I want to hear your voice. Next, Stefan, can you put up the next picture? I want to introduce you to Debbie Thomas. She works for a church, an Episcopal church in Palo Alto, and she is a writer. She writes for the Christian Century. Her education is in writing, but she is also a fantastic theologian. And I found an essay of hers that, well, if I weren't talking about sharing the mic, and if I weren't talking about lifting up the genius of black people, I'd probably just, cut and paste it, make it my words, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to read her essay. It's amazing. I'm really jealous. It's really good. So I am sharing my mic with Debbie Thomas. Look her up. She's got some essays that are fantastic. So last week I talked a lot about myself, and this week I'm going to read someone else's sermon. Yes, I'm feeling pretty vulnerable. But afterwards, tell me if it was worth it, okay? He haunts the places of the dead. Every night the townspeople hear him shrieking in the tombs, and when they're quick enough, they catch him, wrap his wrists and ankles in chains, and haul his naked body, securely shackled, back to town. But there's no containing the crazy. He escapes each time, trailing broken chains behind him, and wanders the wilds, tearing at his skin until it bleeds and trading one kind of pain for another. If he has a name, no one knows it. If he has a history, no one remembers it. If he has a soul worth saving inside that living corpse, no one sees it. No one looks until Jesus does. The story of the Gerasene demoniac is a tough one for us 21st century Christians to enter into because it's full of details we find bizarre. Chatty demons, suicidal swine, instantaneous healing. It's not stuff of black comedy, or is it of horror? How is this ancient exorcism story good news for us? She says, I know that much ink has been spilt in recent decades trying to address what contemporary Christians find anachronistic and troubling about the story. I mean, was the man really possessed by demons or just mentally ill? Is there a danger involved in conflating acute psychological suffering with evil? If the demons were real, why did Jesus negotiate with them? Why did he even show them mercy? And what about those poor pigs? Why did they have to die to secure the demoniac's healing? Didn't Jesus care about them or the economic welfare of the pig-herding townspeople who watched in horror as their livelihood disappeared over a cliff? And they're valuable questions, and I don't mean to dismiss them. But I worry that focusing on these stranger parts of the story prevents us from seeing how this can be our story, a story of our here and now. So please indulge me as I sidestep through the tough stuff and share why I'm haunted in good and necessary ways by the healing of the Gerasene demoniac, and why his encounter with Jesus makes me gasp and squirm and smile and cry and linger and recoil and repent and return, because it is precisely where we ourselves need to begin, and that is with the question. Barry said it. What is your name? Jesus asks when he first encounters the possessed man by the lake. Now remember, that man approached Jesus not to ask for help, but to push Jesus away, maybe even to scare Jesus. In all likelihood, that approach was violent and feral, but Jesus asks for a name anyway, and by doing so, he begins to recall the broken man to himself, to his humanity, to his beginnings, to his unique and precious identity as a child of God. What is your name? Has there ever been a more loving and searching question? What would happen if you allowed Jesus to ask it of you? And what would happen if you were to ask it of others? Who are you? Who are you really? Like beneath the labels and the diagnosis and the pretense and the piety and the fear and the shame, who are you when no one in this world is looking? What name do you yearn to be called in those lonely stretches of the night? Who were you before you lost yourself? Before something vital in you died? Do you remember? Jesus begins where we must begin, with an honest questioning and naming of ourselves. Can we allow him to search us so deeply? Can we hear him asking the tender and intolerable question, what is your name? Second, I believe this story is our story because it tells us the unflinching truth about our condition. Legion, the man says in response to Jesus' question. My name is Legion, a multitude, a vast host, an incalculable swarm. Why? Because in Luke's gospel tells us many demons tormented him. So in other words, the sources of his brokenness are myriad. The assault on his mind, his soul, and his body are many-pronged, and it comes from many sources just braided together. Now, perhaps it doesn't matter how we choose to explain these demons, regardless of that language, whether we're going to use a biblical, a theological, a medical, sociological. What we know for sure is that the man's condition strips him of agency, of sanity, of dignity, and community. It keeps him in isolation, and it renders him anonymous, and encourages him to mutilate his own body. It deadens his soul, it divides his mind. In short, it deprives him of his self-control and propels him towards self-destruction. Does any of this sound familiar? The truth is, what ails us human beings is legion. The evil that haunts us has many faces and many names. We are all, every one of us, vulnerable forces that seek to take us over, to bind our mouths, to take away our true names, and to separate us from God and from each other. Now, some of us suffer from depression or anxiety. Some of us are addicted to sex and alcohol or wealth or thinness. Some of us experience the world at a deafening volume in colors too lurid to our sensitive eyes. Some of us are slaves to the internet, or prone to bitterness, or caught up in cycles of dishonesty, or we lust with our own rightness. Some of us can't shake traumatic memories. Some of us were abused as children. Some of us are seething with jealousy. Some of us are imprisoned within systems of injustice that stretch back so many centuries we just can't imagine liberation. Some of us experience our skin colors, our accents, our genders, our sexualities as magnets for other people's hatred. Some of us suffer illness, and they crisscross those boundaries of medicine and culture and nature and nurture. Some of us know exactly what St. Paul is talking about when he says, what I want to do, I do not do, and what I do, I hate. And if we expanded the definition of possession to include everything that conspires to keep us dead when God wants us alive, then the story of the Gerasene demoniac is not an ancient oddity. It's the air we breathe. It's the zeitgeist we inhabit. It's the pandemic of our time. And that's bad news. But it's not where the story ends. The third reason I consider the story our story is because it tells us exactly where salvation lies, and it does so without hesitancy or apology. When the demoniac sees Jesus, he falls down before him. And when the townspeople come running to see what happened, they find the man sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed in his right mind. Salvation, in other words, lies at the feet of Jesus. It lies in surrendering to the one who alone has power to cast out the horrors which torment us. Now, it's not because Jesus is an arrogant megalomaniac. It's because evil, in all its incarnations, finds Jesus terrifying. It's because there is no death-dealing power in this universe that can withstand the saving, healing, resurrection power of Jesus. It's because even the most destructive demons that we can conjure up will beg for mercy when Jesus comes to town. But this is a story we offer for the possessed. So the question, but is this a story we offer to the possessed who walk through our doors each Sunday? Is it a story we believers even believe anymore? Or has it in the long haul of what this thing we call Christianity, with its stretches of unanswered prayer and unhealed diseases and its too frequent grinds of grief and loss and doubt and boredom, has worn out our souls and watered down our claims? The problem is, we have an eschatology that is glorious but incomplete. We live, as it were, on Holy Saturday. We live in this uncomfortable tension between already and not yet. Jesus, yes, has already defeated death. Yes, the demons are ready to fear his name. And yes, we are right to look to God for the healing and liberation that the Gospels attest to so faithfully. But no, the battle is not over. No, the abyss hasn't yet swallowed the demons whole. And no, the complete freedom we seek is not yet within our grasp. But that doesn't mean this story is false. It means that we have unspeakably more to look forward to. It means our hope is grounded in what Jesus has already done, in the power he's already demonstrated. It means we have every reason to share the good news with confidence now. But Luke takes it a step further in his gospel account, so we have to also. The fourth reason to embrace this story as our own is because it illustrates an unpleasant truth about human relationships. When the townspeople see the demon-possessed man is healed, they don't rejoice. They express no grief, no gratitude, no hospitality, no awe. Instead, they recoil in fear and beg Jesus to go away. What's this mean? Maybe it means we as humans prefer to stick with the demons we know rather than embrace the freedoms we don't. Maybe it means we need some people to be bad and some people to be good. Maybe it means the shackles and chains that bind so many of God's children are the instruments of our own cruel making, the weapons we wield to manage our fears. Maybe it means we settle for tolerance instead of challenging ourselves to love and go out of the comfort zone. Maybe it means the gospel doesn't always bring peace. It also brings upheaval, with messing with our moral categories and our economic comforts and our social structures in ways we even find offensive. Maybe it means resurrection sometimes comes along with and kicks our butts so hard that Jesus, we ask him to leave us alone because we'd rather stay dead. So the story ends with Jesus commissioning the healed man to stay where he is and serve as the first missionary to the townspeople. The same townspeople who feared and shunned and trapped and shackled him for years. I have to admit, this detail makes me laugh, although ruefully. Isn't that just like Jesus? To choose the very people we consider the most unholy, the most unredeemable, the most repulsive and unworthy, and commission them to teach us the gospel. That's God all over. Here then is a story about our truest names. Here's a story about resistance and resurrection. Here's a story about Jesus who finds us naked among the tombs, clothes us with dignity, and scatters the demons to save our souls, and turns us into storytellers who will help and heal the world. Yeah, here's our story.